1987.
Mr. Gorbachev, tear down this wall.
It is not as sexy or as exciting as the Iranian arms deal.
What a hell of a year. And not just because I was born. It was a great year for entertainment media. Just look at this roster of movies that all have had significant cultural impact.
Come quietly or...
The hell are you?
Nobody puts baby in a corner.
Beach walking, huh?
You seem a decent fellow. I hate to kill you. You seem a decent fellow. I hate to die.
Plus, several shows with long-lasting appeal would make their debut this fall as well. Full freaking house, baby. That show was still a juggernaut with kids born several years after the show ended. And that's just established mediums. 1987 is a year that would truly define what home console games would become. Imagine, all in the same year, new IPs of fantastic quality, and all within 7 months. What a wild year! If Super Mario Bros. Was the tease of what was to come back in 1985, 1987 was the promise fulfilled. These games established genres. They took what Super Mario Bros. Had begun and kicked it up a notch.
Damn! Oh, yeah!
What's absolutely insane about this is that we got Metroid and The Legend of Zelda not only in the same year, but the same month. When your industry is new and you don't exactly know what will and won't be a hit, it's hard to plan release dates accordingly, but here we are. Both of these games would do well. Zelda would fare better, while Metroid didn't do as well in Japan, but would sell pretty well in North America. Both will have many imitators, and both would go on to become long-standing franchises. Well, one would be more favored at least.
Who needs courage when you have a gun?
No, world. You put your hands up.
The Legend of Zelda and Metroid are like peas and carrots. They go well together, but they're also part of two completely different food groups. Fun fact, peas are not vegetables, they are legumes. We call them vegetables, but they actually belong to the bean family, or if you're fancy, legumes. Weren't expecting to learn about beans today, were ya? The Legend of Zelda and Metroid are as similar as they are different. While Metroid is more centered on action than Zelda was, for both games, that's not their main focus. The main challenge isn't actually found in completing each level. I mean, Zelda would still incorporate a level structure. Metroid would almost abandon the idea completely. The main idea in both games is exploration. It wasn't about getting to the goal, but about finding the goal. Yet with a similar skeleton, we would get two very different games. The year is 1984. Shigeru Miyamoto is diving headfirst into new territory, designing a game for a home console versus an arcade cabinet. So far, his work has been profitable and notable for Nintendo. He helped make Nintendo competitive in the arcade circuit with Donkey Kong. He furthered the character of Mario with the Mario Bros. Game, officially giving Jumpman a name. He worked as a designer and sometimes director on the arcade titles Tennis, Baseball, Punch-Out, Golf, and the Famicom titles Excite Bike and Devil World. Most of these games you did end up seeing on the NES or Famicom, with the exception of Devil World and Excite Bike, which were Famicom exclusive, and he worked on those titles in tandem. Devil World was developed in Kyoto, while Excite Bike's team was in Tokyo. Miyamoto would travel back and forth to check on Excite Bike's progress. Devil World, on the other hand, was a Pac-Man clone slash, I'll just say it, ripoff. It was never released in America because Nintendo of America had a ban on religious icons in their games, and this game was chock full of them. Also, I'm having a hard time just processing what in the hell is going on in this game. Our main character is a dragon that attacks the ghost of Satan with the power of a crucifix and also eating ice cream cones? Okay. So in 1984, Miyamoto started work on The Legend of Zelda. Part of his inspiration were the Indiana Jones movies that were incredibly popular at the time, and also his own childhood memories of exploring woods and caves around his home. He wanted to recreate that awe and wonder of discovery he experienced as a child in a digital form. Like Excitebike and Devil World, The Legend of Zelda and Super Mario Bros. Were developed simultaneously. But this time, they were developed by the same team. Ideas would be shared across development and would be moved between the two games. For example, the fireball pillars were originally supposed to be a Zelda mechanic, but then were moved over to Super Mario Bros. Because the team decided the idea fit better for Mario. This wouldn't be the last time Miyamoto would share and split ideas between Mario and Zelda. Something similar would happen during the development of Mario's and Zelda's first 3D games for the Nintendo 64. During this time of simultaneous development, Miyamoto did put forth a philosophy to differentiate the two games from each other. It was quite simple. He called Zelda the anti-Mario. This helped decide which ideas belong to which game. The Legend of Zelda originally started out with only 5 dungeons. The idea was players would choose a dungeon to enter from on the title screen and then fight their way through it. As development progressed, Miyamoto thought it would be more fun to explore an overworld to find the dungeons. Thus, the land of Hyrule was born. Fun fact, the overworld was designed in one sitting on a large sheet of graph paper. Miyamoto drew the right side while Tezuka drew the left. It was drawn using markers, that is, ink. They did have whiteout to fix mistakes, but there isn't much whiteout used. They laid out the whole world based mainly on intuition in one multi-hour sitting. With the world and level design coming into place, the focus of The Legend of Zelda became clear. This is a game that would take a long time to complete. It wasn't going to be about attaining a high score or getting to the end of a level to get to the next. The point was to go on a journey to find the 8 pieces of the Triforce and rescue Princess Zelda from the evil pig monster, Ganon. It was an experience to be savored and shared. Miyamoto liked what he saw coming out of the PC RPG scene. In those games, players would share with each other where they were in the game, what they found, and how they got their character more powerful. But the mechanics were more complicated than what was on the Nintendo, and that was a barrier to entry for mainstream audiences. Miyamoto wanted to create that sharing of individual experiences without the complexity of a niche genre. So he simplified everything in Zelda. There were no experience points and no number showing hit points. Instead, your health was represented with hearts, and you gained extra hearts by completing dungeons and finding hidden caves to increase your heart count. You got more powerful swords and better armor as you explored the overworld and found them. The game had a singular focus: bomb every wall, burn every bush. Explore every nook and cranny to find all that you could find. Later dungeons would also be hidden behind these burnable bushes and bombable walls, making this exploration factor not just a side quest, but absolutely necessary to complete the game. The secrets were a bit obtuse though. There weren't clues as to which walls were bombable or which bushes may hold a secret. You had to bomb each wall, burn each bush, and the hints you would find from old men hidden in caves were hardly ever helpful. Partly thanks to a translation issue, and partly thanks to Miyamoto's own stab at copywriting. In an interview about Zelda's development, Miyamoto actually talks about how he wrote some of the text boxes for the game, because he did fancy himself a copywriter. And so he literally wrote, "It's a secret to everybody for the moblin who gives you rupees in secret caves." He thought his meaning was clear, but us American audiences kind of scratched our head at that. Throughout the course of the game, not only would you find hearts and armor and swords, you'd also find other gadgets and tools to use on your adventure. But even then, it still wasn't entirely clear in how you could use some of them. For example, you may have gotten the bow from the first dungeon, but you needed to purchase the arrow separately. But if you didn't do that and you reached the dungeon with Goma, you couldn't defeat her because she could only be killed with bows and arrows to the eye. You also may have had trouble with King Dodongo because there was nothing to tell you that he would eat bombs that would explode inside him. The game was completely obtuse in ways that can be frustrating. But at the same time, that was kind of the point. Miyamoto wanted players to share with friends what they found and figured out. The game was meant to be completed with help from other players in the community. As much as this game was about exploring and capturing the wonder of finding something new, it was also about the community that played it. Kids on the playground would share where they found the magic sword or an extra heart container, where you could find the silver arrow that defeated Ganon. You were meant to figure out the game through trial and error and then tell your buddy what you discovered. In turn, he would share with you what he discovered, and by communicating with each other, you both would help each other beat the game. Kind of like what Miyamoto saw with the RPG games and what their player base would do. Super Mario Bros. Released in 1985 in both Japan and America. That was a swan song to cartridge games. It would show what the Famicom and Nintendo were capable of. In 1986, the Famicom Disk System launched with The Legend of Zelda as a launch title. The disk system expanded the size of the game and also made save states a possibility. Super Mario was a swan song to cartridges. The Legend of Zelda was the overture to a new breed of home console video games. Unfortunately, the disk system wouldn't sell well, and thus would never come out to any other market. Fortunately though, cartridge tech would catch up, and The Legend of Zelda would be ported to the Nintendo Entertainment System and released in the United States in 1987. Though they did have to drop a sound channel and add a battery to the cartridge to make the saving feature work. The Legend of Zelda released in the United States, and Nintendo America made a large event about it. They even made the game cartridge gold. It was a hit, and it helped usher in a new era of home console video games. While Miyamoto and his team were hard at work over at Nintendo R&D 4, now known as Nintendo EAD, the R&D 1 division had a small project of their own in the works. Headed by Gunpei Yokoi, R&D 1 was the largest and oldest development division at Nintendo. Yokoi started as an electrical engineer at Nintendo in 1965 to help run their manufacturing facility. This is when Nintendo primarily made and sold playing cards along with other toys here and there. Nintendo president Hiroshi Yamauchi was touring the facility one day when he saw a little device that Yokoi had made in his spare time. He was impressed with it and asked him to make it into a full-fledged product, which he did. And it was very profitable for Nintendo. Yokoi was quickly promoted and given his own division to run. And as Nintendo entered the video game space in the 70s and 80s, Yokoi became instrumental in establishing Nintendo in this space. In 1985, the Famicom was a runaway success, as well as the NES in America, thanks in large part to Super Mario Bros. Developed by Miyamoto's team. While Miyamoto diverted his team's attention to finishing The Legend of Zelda, Yokoi tasked two of his team members to begin development on a game similar in scope and feel to Super Mario. The two team members were graphic designers with no game designer or programming experience whatsoever. They had worked on some of the Game & Watch titles, but they hadn't done much outside of that. As a matter of fact, they'd only been with the company for a little over a year. Yokoi's philosophy, though, was if you can draw, you can make a game. I mean, who can fault him for that? We really didn't know much about design this early on in the industry, and everybody was still figuring this out in a fly-by-the-seat-of-your-pants fashion. Well, we do know one of the designers was Hiroji Kayotake. In the developer interviews, I found the other designer was not named. Doing a little sleuthing, I do know that both Kayotake and his partner were relatively new hires and had only been at the company, about a year or so. My best guess is the second developer was more than likely Hirofumi Matsuoka, but that is just an educated guess. These two goofballs were largely left on their own to develop whatever game their imaginations came up with. They decided they wanted to create a space version of what they also called an anti-Mario game. Hey, there's that anti-Mario game phrase again, which their definition of an anti-Mario game was pretty much changing the character's physics around. They took the inertia out of the character's jump, and they also didn't want you to avoid enemies by jumping, but turned the jump itself into a weapon. The idea for the screw attack was actually one of the first ideas they had in development. And to make it even more anti-Mario, they took a lot of inspiration from Ridley Scott's 1979 Alien movie, and spent a lot of their development time getting the tone and atmosphere right, as well as the core mechanics and moves established of the playable character Samus Aran. So not only would the jump physics be different from Mario, jump attack be different from Mario, the tone itself would be completely opposite of Mario. Instead of light and bright colors and friendly, it was going to be dark, brooding, and lonely. Originally called Space Hunter, the name was changed to Metroid, which was a smashing of the words Metro and Android together. Metro because the game took place in a series of underground caverns, kind of like a metro, and Android because Samus looked kind of like an android. Metroid ended up becoming the name of the elusive deadly creatures that were the crux of the story for the game. So after 10 months of work, these two had very little to show for themselves, and the game was set to be released in just 3 more months. Enter Yoshio Sakamoto. This is where things get complicated. From my perspective and opinion, credit is a finicky thing. To some people, it is incredibly important. For others, not so much. The thing with being credited with something is that it can really bolster your career or ruin it. You know, whatever. I find myself at an in-between view on credit. It's nice, but not of the utmost importance. But I do want to acknowledge exactly who did what and who is owed their proper dues. Yoshio Sakamoto seems to be given the credit as the creator of the Metroid franchise, which I find to be, odd. Considering that this Nintendo developer interview claims that it was originally Hiroji Kayotake and that other unnamed developer, potentially Hirofumi Matsuoka, who worked on their own for some time. Sakamoto confirms this himself in the interview. He actually didn't step in until these last 3 months, and when he was approached to join the team and help these two hapless chaps, Kayotake and maybe Matsuoka, finish their game, he initially refused. Knowing their workload he would be under, he said no. But because he happened to be between projects and a more senior designer convinced him to join the team, he finally agreed. Sakamoto joined the Metroid team and took over as the director. And once seeing that after 10 months of work hardly anything was done, he helped mobilize the entire department of R&D1 to finish the game. This is where it gets interesting. While Sakamoto wasn't a part of the team for the bulk of the time, he is technically responsible for the bulk of the work. And because he was able to wrangle a game out of this, he was given the title of game director. So while he may not be the creator of Metroid, Sakamoto is the savior of Metroid. But at the same time, I'd like to make sure in this video that Kayotake's and Matsuoka's, maybe, names are not erased from the history of this franchise's inception. Without them, the base of the core mechanics that we know and identify as a Metroid game probably wouldn't exist. Like we credit both Miyamoto and Tezuka as the original creators in Mario, we should likewise have the creation of Metroid shared among Sakamoto, Kayotake, and Matsuoka. Maybe. After Sakamoto took over, they began by cutting a lot of the moves that Kayotake had given Samus. They weren't going to be able to fit all he had designed into the system's memory. While this crushed Kayotake, he was very relieved to finally have help in finishing a game he had no idea how to finish. With the very limited time restraint, the team worked well into the night for 3 months straight. While they couldn't create new assets to help fill out what hadn't been designed because of time, they did figure out ways around it and create differentiation between the different areas and levels of the game to make something unique and imaginative. Once finished, Sakamoto felt a real sense of accomplishment at achieving the impossible. He says of the experience, "Gradually, Metroid grew into a game, and when it was nearly complete, the ending crawl came together with the names of members of the development staff. When I saw that, I almost cried. It was an emotional moment." Now, I just want to take a second here to reflect on this. Metroid has absolutely zero, and I mean zero, business being as good as it is. This game should barely be good, let alone an original masterpiece, let alone the genesis of an entire subgenre of games that so many indie developers are now copying out the wazoo. The completion of this game is nothing short of miraculous. But why was this game so successful? One was its atmosphere. While Miyamoto was creating gleeful, fun-filled adventures full of delight and happiness, Metroid struck a more serious tone. It was empty and foreboding. The soundtrack evoked a darker tone and showed that Nintendo isn't just for kids. Not to say the game was horribly violent or gory, it wasn't, but it doesn't have the playful nature other Nintendo software titles had. 2, it was fun to explore. While by today's standards the map really isn't that big, but with no point of reference or map screen, you had to learn the labyrinth yourself. And most games, like Tower of Druaga, had most of the labyrinth laid out on the screen right before you. This one was room by room, section by section. Exploring an area you weren't equipped for yet would mean almost certain death. 3, they changed how the power-ups work compared to Mario and other titles. When you get the Morph Ball or Mari Ball, you get to keep it for the rest of the game. When you get a new missile tank, it doesn't refill your missiles, it adds to your capacity. Same with energy tanks. The Various Suit cuts down your damage and it doesn't go away. Mario would lose his Fire Flower power-up when he took damage, and the Starman was limited by a timer. Everything that Samus got, she kept. They would also help you reach new areas of the game that weren't reachable before, so each new power-up opened up more of the game. The game is quite imaginative. It was non-linear and open, unlike other platformers that had come before it. Metroid was in a league of its own. So why talk about these games together in one video and not separately? Well, because it's kind of hard to separate these first entries of these franchises. As different as they are, and as different as they will become as they age and get iterated on in future installments, they share more similarities than differences, to be honest. They also both accomplished something that would change the course of game design. They simplified the RPG. They made it approachable to a wider audience. Miyamoto did it consciously with Zelda, while Sakamoto and Kayotake did it unintentionally, or so I assume. Your typical RPG character gets stronger the more they level up. They level up by fighting and defeating enemies and gaining experience points. With each level, their health goes up, magic goes up, offense goes up, defense stats, and so on. Both Zelda and Metroid took those ideas and stripped them down to their base forms. You gained experience by playing and exploring more. The more you knew about the game, the enemies, and how they worked, the better you were at fighting them. You gained more hearts in Zelda by defeating bosses, and you gained more energy tanks in Metroid by finding them. Sometimes in the open, sometimes hidden away. You gained better defensive stats by finding an armor upgrade, the rings in Zelda and the Various Suit in Metroid. Zelda upped the attack stat with finding more powerful swords, which you could only get if you had a certain amount of heart containers. Metroid gave you the long beam and then the ice beam and missile tanks to up your ammo capacity. Zelda was a more obvious, straightforward RPG light, while Metroid took the ideas and applied them to a typical action platformer. As much as their tones were different and their core gameplay was different, they actually share a lot of common bonds when you look beyond the surface. They simplified the RPG genre and applied its concepts in ways that make sense to their own respective genres. They also featured exploration as the main mechanic, where it was about the journey and not as much about reaching the goal. With new items, you unlocked more of the world, and more could then be explored. Also, the strategy guide exists because of these games. Nintendo Power exists partly to give players walkthroughs. The very first issue of Nintendo Power has a complete guide for Zelda's Second Quest. 3 years later, in the October 1991 issue of Nintendo Power, a complete walkthrough for Metroid is published. Both games were released in the same year, 1986 in Japan, and in the same year and month, August 1987, in America. Each game has its own unique tone and intended audience. If you wanted a rollicking fantasy adventure to live your boyhood dreams of saving the kingdom as a shining knight, you had Zelda. If you wanted a brooding, mature sci-fi experience like the Alien movies, you had Metroid. Both games accomplished the same wonder of exploration, just with different genres. They are as similar as they are different. Metroid and Zelda are two sides of the same coin. Thanks for watching this. Make sure you like it, leave a comment, subscribe, ring the bell so you don't miss any videos. Make sure you share it on Facebook, share it on Instagram, share it on TikTok, share it on Twitter. Like, comment, subscribe, feed the algorithm.
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 allow me to rip the Band-Aid right off. I'm skipping Zelda 2. Every reason you may think why I am skipping it is exactly the reason why I am skipping over that title. I know there are some of you who enjoy this type of game. Masochists. I jest. There are redeeming qualities in Zelda 2, The Adventures of Link, or Link's Adventure, I forget the subtitle of it.
You moron, it's right there, you just showed it on the screen not even 30 seconds ago!
Anyway, the swordplay is innovative for its time, but it's also, how to put this delicately, clunky.
It's a steaming pile of hot monkey poo garbage.
Oh, hello there, what was that? I thought I buried that painful subconscious a long time ago.
I'm back. You're worthless.
Oh.
Your wife hates you.
No, she doesn't. She loves me. She got me this tie for Father's Day.
You're half the man of others. Your family would be better off without you. And your children would be happier calling a better man Dad.
Whoa. Ouch. Oh, okay. Time to drink you back into oblivion. Retrospective is brought to you by the following virtual therapy services. Not actually sponsored, this is only a bit. Do not turn to alcohol to solve your mental anguish. Please seek real help. In the long run, Zelda 2's contribution to the franchise is minimal. I'm not saying the game is unimportant, it's actually very important. Kind of important. Somewhat important. It's got its redeeming qualities and a dedicated fan base, okay? I am not diminishing that, it's just not prudent to discuss this game at this time. We will come back to its redeeming qualities when we discuss Ocarina of Time. Ow! I get it! You like Zelda 2. The fact is, Zelda games are about fun, with a capital F. And I don't mean the subjective form of fun, like how some people enjoy playing Frisbee and others enjoy stamp collecting. No judgment. And I get fun is always still subjective, but I think you'll get where I'm going with this point. The fun I am talking about is a feeling. The totality of the work of something. Everything about it is just fun. Like how Chuck E. Cheese is a fun atmosphere. If you're 7. Or better yet, think of a fun person. Like Ronald McDonald. He just seems like a fun guy no matter the occasion. Fun is in his DNA. Even if you don't like him or are terribly afraid of clowns. As for Zelda 2, I mean, he's nice, I guess.
F is for friends who do stuff together. U is for you and me. N is for anywhere and anytime at all.
Down here in the deep blue sea. F is for fire that burns down the whole town. U's for uranium bombs. N is for no survivors when you're
Blank done.
(1992). The 90s had arrived. By 1992, Nickelodeon was cranking out The Adventures of Pete and Pete, Fox Kids started airing Batman the Animated Series, Friday nights were for TGIF on ABC, and the console war was raging. It was Sega versus Nintendo in the fight of the decade. And with a 2-year head start, Sega was giving Nintendo a run for their money, mainly thanks to one Tom Kalinske. In 1990, Tom Kalinske was approached to be the head of Sega of America and was tasked with taking down the Big N. His approach was a no-holds-barred, bare-knuckle marketing brawl. He approved aggressive pricing, daring campaign, and edgy ads with attitude. He went straight for the jugular. He treated this marketing blitz as a political campaign. They didn't just advertise their own products, they attacked Nintendo viciously. They would do anything that showed Nintendo as old and rusty, while in contrast showing Sega as new, fresh, and exciting. By 1992, the Super Nintendo had been on the market for a full year in the US, while Sega had the Genesis on the market since '89. Nintendo now had their answer to the Genesis and was able to go toe-to-toe against Sega and its edgy aura, and that aura was working. Sega was taking large chunks out of Nintendo's market lead. Nintendo was a family-friendly brand of yore, and Sega represented the spirit of the 90s. Gen X was growing up, and millennials were entering the scene. The Super Nintendo launched in 1991 with Super Mario World, which was more Mario. Sega, at the end of 1991, introduced Sonic, and Sonic was everything that Mario wasn't. He was fast, he was cool, he liked chili dogs for some reason. Sonic was epic and transformative, while Super Mario World appeared to be more iterative than innovative. Appeared is the key word here. Go ahead and click the banner and check out my Super Mario World retrospective if you haven't already. I'll wait. Sega's tactics were taking a bite out of Nintendo's lunch. Sega was leading the way for the 16-bit era. At the end of 1992 in North America, Sega had sold a total of 7.6 million Genesises to Nintendo's 6.9 million SNESs. Is how do you pluralize these? This is hard. English is tricky. Anyway, this was largely thanks to their 2-year head start. But while Sega did have that lead on total lifetime sales, the SNES did outsell the Genesis in 1992. Barely. 4.9 million to 4.5 million. Plus, Nintendo was still dominating the video game market as a whole by taking a whopping 80% of the total revenue spent on video games that year. $4.29 billion out of a total of $5.3 billion. This was largely in thanks to the newish Game Boy and the NES that was still performing pretty strongly in the market. But winning the 16-bit console generation was really important. Nintendo could solely rely on their legacy product for only a short time. They needed to grow with the competition. All in all, at the end of the 16-bit console war, Nintendo would still come out the winner worldwide by outselling the Genesis by almost 20 million units. Back to 1992, this year was a different story. Nintendo needed the next big thing. Super Mario World had its hooks in people, but they needed to show what the Super Nintendo could really offer up. Nintendo wanted to prove that while they could be challenged, they couldn't be beaten. In 1989, Nintendo was being assaulted on 2 fronts. On one side, they had Sega with the Genesis/Master Drive, and on the other, NEC Home Entertainment had also released a TurboGrafx 16/PC engine, depending which area of the world you lived in. Nintendo needed to step up. That year, they internally announced the development of a successor to the NES/Famicom. Some of the current projects would be switched from NES titles to SNES titles, 2 of which were Super Mario Bros. 4 and Zelda 3. Miyamoto and his team switched gears to develop for the updated hardware and went into experimentation mode on what could and could not be done on the new 16-bit console. Like the original Super Mario Bros. And Legend of Zelda titles, the new SNES Mario and Zelda projects would be developed in tandem, though this time Miyamoto would focus on being director of only the Super Mario World game, while Takahashi Tezuka would take over as being the director for the new Zelda title for the SNES. Now, the goal was to have both games ready at launch. This would showcase the new hardware with new entries for 2 of Nintendo's most popular franchises that would feature updated graphics and gameplay only possible on the Super Nintendo. Unfortunately, this proved to be more than they could handle. Being the face of Nintendo, Super Mario World was chosen to take priority to finish in time for launch. Zelda would have to wait an extra year, and it would take advantage of that extra development time. Like the original Zelda, Zelda 3 had a lot of ambitions. Originally, the team wanted to be able to have 3 parallel worlds for Link to travel between. They wanted bushes to be set on fire and then spread to create giant brush fires. They wanted you to be able to dig trenches and reroute waterways. They wanted a systems-first game design 25 years before they would create a systems-first Zelda game. Unfortunately, they needed to wrap up development to get the game shipped and out the door. Miyamoto was confident, though, that if the team just had 6 more months, they could have accomplished some of those features. But what they did accomplish was monumental. It released in 1991 in Japan under the title Super Famicom Legend of Zelda Triforce of the Gods. The game released in America a year later. The name was changed to The Legend of Zelda: A Link to the Past. This was done because of Nintendo of America's strict ban on religious references in their games. Even some icons in the game were changed to maintain that rule, even if it wasn't intentionally meant to be a religious reference. A Link to the Past would undo everything Zelda 2 did on the NES, with the exception of some element of the swordplay mechanics. It would go back to the basic gameplay of The Legend of Zelda, but with more. There'd be more secrets, more items, more weapons. There'd be more to explore, more to do, more to experience. Whatever The Legend of Zelda did, A Link to the Past would do bigger, better, and more. But the game was also made more accessible than The Legend of Zelda was. While venturing forth and exploring on your own was highly encouraged, key story locations and dungeon locations were marked on your map. They didn't always give away how you were to reach or open said dungeons, but at least you had a general direction you knew you had to head to. The rest, you were left up to your own devices to figure out. The new hardware would be used to add special effects that would create drama and depth to the setting. At the start of the game, you can hear the sound of rain pelting Link's house. And when you enter the castle during this opening sequence, you'll hear the rain pouring on the roof here as well. The Lost Woods would be covered in a dense fog, creating mystery and unease. And after you get the Master Sword, the fog lifts, but you still see the shadow of the trees, showing that this is a dense forest. Some enemies would shock you when hit, and the whole screen would pixelate to simulate the shock Link was getting. The same pixelation effect would be used to transition from the light world to the dark world. The Legend of Zelda: A Link to the Past was taking full advantage of the new features in the SNES. In addition to these fun new atmospheric enhancements, Link was now able to move in 8 directions as opposed to only 4. This did introduce an issue with the swordplay though. The team had difficulty trying to figure out how Link would thrust his sword on the diagonal axis. No matter what they did, it just never looked or felt right. So while Link could travel in 8 directions, the sprite could still only face the cardinal 4. This created a problem of how Link would attack diagonally. Instead of simply thrusting his sword forward like he did in The Legend of Zelda, the team made the sword swipe in an arcing motion. This enabled the basic form of swordplay. You now had to position Link around the weak points of some enemies to make sure you didn't hit their sword or shield. Hey, some of that swordplay mechanic from Zelda 2 did show up in this one. What do you know? It is kinda somewhat sorta important. Ow! Sorry! But to be able to strike diagonally, Link was given an extra move. If you held down the attack button, Link would hold his sword out to charge up a spin attack, enabling him to attack the diagonal angles, solving the team's diagonal attack problem. This charge move would become a Zelda staple, and also would come into play in later dungeons of the game when Link would get his final shield upgrade. In order to progress in certain areas, you had to block these laser beams with your new mirror shield. If they're coming from the side, you could hold down the attack button, so while Link's sword was held out, his shield would be at to the side, blocking these side attacks. It's a pretty clever alternative use of the spin attack. The SNES controller also added more buttons, which added more moves to Link's repertoire. There's still a dedicated button to attack and a dedicated button to item usage, but now you could press X to bring up the map at any time, and the A button became a context-sensitive action button. Hold A down and you could dash across the map if you had the Pegasus boots. Stand in front of a sign and press A to read it. Stand next to a sign, press and hold A for a minute to lift, and then press A again to throw that sign. Or to throw anything else you were able to pick up, like jars. Also, breakable jars became a Zelda staple in this game. Press A to talk to an NPC. Hold A and then use a D-pad to push or pull objects or push or pull switches. So the context-sensitive action button became a staple here as well. With the power of the SNES, Miyamoto could now realize some of his original visions from The Legend of Zelda. In the first game, there was this pond that you had to drain the water from to reveal the entrance to a dungeon. The problem is, they couldn't animate the water draining because of hardware constraints. But with the SNES, that could now be accomplished. Also, with the parallel worlds mechanic, you could have actions in one world affect the layout of another, which created interesting and new puzzle mechanics. Well, at least one time. Some of the original ideas Miyamoto had envisioned for his great medieval quest could now be realized. A Link to the Past was more Zelda on steroids. Super Mario Bros. Laid the foundational basics for Mario, and Super Mario Bros. 3 defined what a Mario game is. Likewise, The Legend of Zelda laid the same foundational basics for a Zelda game, while A Link to the Past, Zelda's third game, would define what makes a Zelda game a Zelda game. Just about every Zelda title that will come after A Link to the Past will follow the path that this game had forged, for better or for worse. So let's take a look at 3 key elements that A Link to the Past defined. The overworld. In the original Legend of Zelda, the overworld was kind of an afterthought. The game was more focused on the dungeon design. But once they added the overworld with its focus on exploration, it was ripe for a significant upgrade. A Link to the Past saw the land of Hyrule expand significantly. Key elements for the original were reimagined and expanded on. The Lost Woods went from a puzzle element to a mysterious and creepy location. Death Mountain was now an actual mountain you could climb and not just a pile of rocks to bomb. There's now a castle in the center of Hyrule that would become the focal point of the map, and would become the focal point of just about every Zelda map from here on out. A Link to the Past would still focus on a level-by-level type linear progression with the dungeons, but the overworld this time would be full of more life and better telegraphed secrets. Areas of Hyrule didn't all look the same. It felt like a fully lived-in world. But this game didn't just have one overworld, it had 2. There was the Light World and the Dark World. To save on system memory, a lot of the overworld design was the same with a simple color palette swap to differentiate. But some areas and obstacles and placements were different enough that the Dark World felt both similar and completely alien at the same time. This idea of dueling worlds would become a standard Zelda motif. It'd be used again in Ocarina of Time, Oracle of Seasons and Ages, and of course, the direct sequel to Link of the Past, A Link Between Worlds. Both of these worlds will be filled with fun and adventure. The land of Hyrule became a fully realized place, with deserts, lakes, mountains, and forests. There were more details in the design and art. There were friends to find and strange new creatures who would give you gifts. The world wasn't just a place to explore, but a land to be experienced. The dungeons. The Legend of Zelda's dungeons were labyrinths in their design. They weren't really puzzles to solve, and they were all very similar looking to each other. Nothing made any dungeon really stand out from the others. Except this one. Similar symbols in different cultures can come to represent wildly different things. A Link to the Past now gave a theme and motif to the dungeons. There were temples, caves, towers, and castles. It wasn't just simply finding keys to unlock doors to progress through the dungeon. There were also puzzles to solve. What you do in one room could affect the layout of another, thereby progressing Link through the dungeon. The opening of the game acts as a great tutorial for how dungeons in this game will work. When you wake up, you'll first want to open the chest in your house, which contains the lantern. You then make your way to Hyrule Castle, where the path guides you to this bush. Pick it up, and you fall down the pit. We immediately learn that pits like this on the overworld are not dangerous. They are secret entrances. We get the sword and shield from our uncle, and then make our way to the bowels of the castle. The first room we enter once under the castle has a locked door, a blue knight, and a treasure chest. Defeating the knight grants us a key, and the chest contains a map of the dungeon. We can now open that door and also see the rest of the rooms in the dungeon. We then enter a large area with multiple levels and pits. We can either go down the stairs or just jump off the ledge, teaching us how multi-levels work. We also learn that when we strike a knight, we knock them back, and we can send them off the ledge into the pit. So these pits are deadly to Link and his enemies. And also some obstacles can be used to our advantage. We have these knights patrolling this area with barriers, which teaches us how barriers affect enemy behavior and detection. And if we so choose, we could completely skip those knights by going up to the top layer and crossing a bridge and coming down the other side, not having to worry about fighting them then. We're going to see elements of choice in dungeons and how we approach situations. The next room we enter, we get locked in. The door ahead is locked, and the other 2 doors close. They only open once we defeat the enemy, showing us some rooms will lock us in until we defeat all the enemies inside. This knight will not drop a key, so we can't open that locked door. We'll have to explore the door to our right, teaching us we sometimes have to go out of our way to progress forward. The next room we defeat the Blue Knight, get a key, and open a chest to find a new item, the Boomerang. The next enemy we encounter is a knight in the dungeon. We may be tempted to use our new Boomerang to see what it does. It doesn't hurt him, but it does stun him for a moment, so we can kill him without fear of him retaliating. This comes in handy when fighting the knight with the mace. You can stun him, go in, get a few swipes, and then get out before he starts swinging the mace again. After rescuing Zelda, we have to push this block in the throne room, showing that some paths have obstacles that need to be pushed aside to be revealed. We venture through the sewers where we use a lantern to light unlit torches, and it ends with us having to pull a switch. In all this, we learn the basics of how the dungeons will work, how enemies work, how to explore, and how to push and pull and pick things up. We also learn not all key items for a dungeon will be found in the dungeon. They'll be found in the overworld before we even enter the dungeon. If you don't get that lantern, you're not going to do well in the sewers. These won't be your NES Zelda dungeons, that is for sure. The dungeons became more puzzle-focused and less of an obstacle-focused labyrinthian gauntlet. And these dungeons also became real places. Despite the fact that the game was still a 2D game, the team treated these dungeons as three-dimensional spaces. In the Tower of Hera, in order to get the dungeon's item, the Moon Pearl, you had to fall down this hole in the floor above in order to reach the chest. So you had to understand how the dungeon would be laid out in 3D space. And for the Skull Woods dungeon, you have to exit back into the overworld to find other entrances and pits, some hidden, to fall into other areas of the dungeon in order to progress. The designers were able to craft dungeons in a 2D space with a 3D feel. The dungeons were now themed, more complex, more realized, and just more fun than they were before. Completing one had a different feeling of accomplishment. You didn't just feel skilled or strong, you felt smart at solving the puzzles that lay within it. The items. Items take a little more necessary role this time around in completing dungeons. Items like the bow and arrow, hookshot, hammer, and fire rod are found as a treasure item in Eastern Palace of the Light World and 3 of the dungeons in the Dark World. They're also needed to progress and complete the dungeon they are found in, and the hookshot and hammer open up parts of the world that were previously unreachable. Most items will be found by exploring the overworld though, and quite a few of them will be needed to venture to the next dungeon, like the Book of Majora and the Quake and Ether medallions, and the Zora flippers. And the more you explore the overworld, the more items you can find that aid you on your quest, like the bag of magic powder that can turn anti-fairies into normal fairies, or these slime guys into Groucho Marx guys. You'll find bottles to keep potions and fairies in, the bug catching net to catch fairies to keep in the bottles, the ice rod, magic cape, cane of Burna, Zora flippers, blue mail, sword upgrades, bomb upgrades, bow upgrades, all are found the more you explore the overworld. And some items, like the cane of Burna, make defeating dungeon bosses a lot easier. If you thought there was a lot to find in The Legend of Zelda, A Link to the Past has a ton of extra items and equipment to find, and this time around, the items and equipment are a bit more Metroid-esque. Acquiring them opens up more of the world to explore like it did in Metroid. What's interesting is how the world opens up. Once you finish the tutorial dungeon in the Light World, most of the Light World is open for you to explore. The only places you can't reach are Death Mountain, the Zora Waterfall, and this island in the middle of the lake. But once you get the Power Glove from the Desert Palace, you can now reach Death Mountain, where the Tower of Hera, the 3rd and final dungeon in the Light World is, and the Zora Waterfall, where you can get the flippers to reach this island in the lake. Now, only one area of Death Mountain is the only region of Hyrule you can't yet reach. The Dark World is designed the opposite way. You are walled off to the small corner of the map. Once you get the hammer from the Dark Palace, the first dungeon in the Dark World, does the Dark World map really open up. Almost the whole of both maps are fully open to you, and now in the Light World you can reach warp points that lead you to different areas of the Dark World. It has some echoes of the Metroid world progression design. Now, the full realization of how Zelda items will work is not completely established in A Link to the Past. Only a handful of dungeons absolutely require the key item to finish the dungeon and defeat the dungeon's boss, like the bow and arrow in the Eastern Palace, the magic hammer in the Dark Palace, and the hookshot in Swamp Palace. What's interesting is in Misery Mire, you get the Cane of Samaria, which is needed at only one point in the dungeon to create a block to push the switch down. The item actually becomes a necessity in the next dungeon, Turtle Rock, which it would have made more sense to have that item there, but I digress. That part of the formula will be perfected in the next Zelda game, Link's Awakening. A quick aside and some stray thoughts before we move on. A Link to the Past would also begin the separated structure that most Zelda games would follow. A set of intro dungeons, an interlude, and a second half of more challenging dungeons. Ocarina of Time would follow this, Wind Waker, Twilight Princess, Phantom Hourglass, Spirit Tracks, kinda, Skyward Sword, and A Link Between Worlds would all take cues from this kind of formula. Now, all of these aesthetical and mechanical features are all well and good. They are the defining features of what makes a Zelda game a Zelda game. But there is something else that A Link to the Past establishes that puts the cherry on top of the Zelda game definition this game establishes. The overall vibe for A Link to the Past is fun, with a capital F. Not only did this game establish the key dungeon ideas, standard archetypal Zelda weapons, and a fleshed out lived-in world and lore, it also established the overall vibe that would encapsulate Zelda games from here on out. I like to call Zelda the Star Wars of video games. I know there are Star Wars video games, so just give me a minute to explain what I mean here. Within each of the trilogies of Star Wars, the main hero comes from humble beginnings, has an overly positive and sometimes enthusiastic view of the world, and overcomes severe obstacles to defeat evil and restore peace to a galaxy in turmoil. Or, become evil and the main bad guy. Anyway, Star Wars is a small-scale story that takes place in a fleshed-out, large-scaled world. It also doesn't take itself too seriously. There are quirky characters and humor sprinkled throughout all of the films, and it doesn't shy away from silliness. It actually fully embraces it at times. The story can quickly become dark and brooding, covering harsh events that show evil is real and is a threat. For the most part, these moments are balanced pretty well, except for Jar Jar. Star Wars is fun through and through. It has action, drama, romance, and can be quirky. Zelda is the same way. It's a small story taking place amongst big events. A boy awakens to save a princess. But the stakes are actually higher than that. The whole world is at stake, and it's also filled with memorable characters and even silly moments. Like this middle-aged man, or the bat that curses you with an upgraded magic meter. But as quickly as it can embrace the silliness, Zelda can also embrace dark, harsh realities. A father missing his son who disappeared. A boy falsely accused of regicide.
You have selected regicide. If you know the name of the king or queen being murdered, press 1.
Zelda has a small story with big stakes, but its embrace of silliness gives it its quirky Zelda feel. It made the game fun and amusing, but at the same time, that silliness was always done in a way that never distracted from the epic story it was trying to tell. Instead, it became part of Zelda's charm. The quirky moments are something that future Zelda games will continue to lean into, but they're always done in a way that adds to the overall motif of the game. It doesn't take away from the darker, more brooding moments. In contrast, it makes those moments stand out all the more, and it all works together to form a cohesive, fun product. A Link to the Past may be the third Zelda game, but it's the first one to define what the core experiences of Zelda will be. The dungeon formats, the lore and story, the Master Sword, the sages, Ganon's origins are introduced. The items, the world, the quirkiness, everything we know and love about Zelda started with this game and has been iterated on from here. But most importantly, this game made Zelda fun. If you're a creative, the scariest thing you can be given is carte blanche. Having a blank slate is daunting and almost impossible to create in. Having parameters, and sometimes really strict parameters, can lead to the most creative of products. The mind suddenly wants to push the envelope. You'll want to find ways to go against the grain while still coloring inside the lines. Don't think outside the box. Recontextualize the box. 1965. One Gunpa Yokoi, fresh out of university with a degree in electronics, would start his career at a Nintendo toy factory as an electrician. By the end of the 70s, he would find himself running an entire research and development division as a toy maker and video game designer. All thanks to a luck of the draw visit from Nintendo's president, Hiroshi Yamauchi, early in his career. A serendipitous happenstance. Yokoi's hits included the Ultra Hand, the Love Tester, and the Game & Watch series. He'd be one of Nintendo's first arcade game designers when they entered the video game market. He was a trailblazer in this new industry of video games and would mentor one Shigeru Miyamoto as he worked on Donkey Kong. In 1981, Yokoi's team released the first Game & Watch handhelds. Other handheld games of the time used LEDs. The Game & Watches used a pre-printed liquid crystal display, the same technology used in calculators. This was widely available tech. Casio and Sharp were fiercely competing with each other in the calculator space, making supply plentiful and affordable. LCDs were cheap as butt, yo. It was successful. Game & Watch imitations would abound. From this, Yokoi coined a personal development philosophy: lateral thinking with withered technology. Nintendo, as a corporation, would also adopt this philosophy, which stands to this day. Withered technology is just old, cheap tech, like the liquid crystal displays and calculators. The lateral thinking was a creative process in appropriating this old, cheap hardware in a way not exactly thought of before to give it a second life, like using liquid crystal displays as the graphics for an electronic game. Don't think outside the box. Recontextualize the box. Yokoi would later apply lateral thinking with withered technology to Nintendo's first portable console, the Game Boy. Released in 1989, the Game Boy was not a powerhouse of tech. It had a whopping 4 shades of gray for color on a dot matrix display. Also, it wouldn't be backlit. Instead, the display would be an ugly puke green color to help with the contrast, making the 4 shades of gray actually 4 shades of puke green. Not all of Nintendo was on board. Some took to calling it the Lame Boy. While there was valid criticism of the hardware's limitations, Yokoi stuck to his guns. These limitations would translate into a long-lasting, affordable piece of gaming hardware. 10 hours of battery life and an $89.99 price point. It was a perfect blend of price and quality. It was a banger of a value. While the competition would have more advanced handheld consoles, they couldn't touch Nintendo on price and power consumption. It was a battery-eating monster that took 6 AA batteries for less than half of the playtime, and was almost twice the price. This was a game changer. The Game Boy crowned Nintendo as king of the handhelds, a throne that has yet to be usurped. This is, in fact, the console that would one day give us Pokemon. It's dogfighting the game! Flash forward to 1993. Link's Awakening is a Zelda franchise debut on portable hardware, and the first Zelda game to have a strong emphasis on story and character arcs. While Nintendo would still be a gameplay-first developer, storytelling was now becoming more important in the development process. This game is an interesting anomaly, as it not only has one, but 2 faithful remakes. In 1998, a colorized version was made for the Game Boy Color, and it came with an extra bonus dungeon called the Color Dungeon, and support for the Game Boy printer. Then 21 years later, Link's Awakening would get a full polygonal remake for the Nintendo Switch, which is strangely accurate to the original source with minimal, and I mean minimal, changes to the core gameplay and mechanics. The main source of footage for this video will come from this version. Link's Awakening is a weird and wonderful ride. It further develops what the traditional Zelda experience would become. Ironically, it also breaks from the traditional Zelda story motif. It doesn't take place in Hyrule, Zelda is not in the game whatsoever, and characters from other Nintendo franchises make appearances throughout. Something Takashi Tezuka says if it were to happen today, he'd be mad, even though he's the one who originally did it. The Legend of Zelda Link's Awakening is weird, yet it doesn't think outside the Zelda box. Rather, it recontextualizes what that Zelda box is. After the completion of A Link to the Past, Nintendo programmer Kazuyaki Morita had gotten his hands on a Game Boy development kit. Despite the Game Boy being a Nintendo product, his department only had one dev kit, since his division wasn't actively developing Game Boy games. Morita was trying to get a Zelda-type game running on the Game Boy in his spare time, a piece of hardware with very limited capabilities compared to the Super Nintendo. Takahashi Tezuka took notice of this pet project of his. Another serendipitous happenstance in the company's history. He latched himself onto the idea, but the game was not an official Nintendo product. The two would work on this prototype after work hours. As they progressed, more people were brought into this after-school Zelda club. The team's imaginations were going wild. Ideas that were scrapped in the Link to the Past made a comeback. Tezuka had always wanted to be able to unequip the Master Sword and have Link carry 2 items at once, and potentially combine them, like bomb arrows. Hey, they did that like 15 years before Twilight Princess, I didn't know that! Miyamoto did not want the sword to ever be unequipped. The idea was scrapped in Link to the Past, but for this project, they went for it. This was an unsanctioned game, everything was in play, and anything was possible. As experimental mechanics were being played with, Kensuke Tanabe and Yoshiaki Koizumi were brought in to flesh out the scenario and story. For the scenario and characters, Tezuka wanted something that felt surreal and dreamy, like Twin Peaks, which he was a huge fan of at the time. Kensuke and Yoshiaki ran with it, creating a dreamlike setting with kooky characters. You may remember Yoshiaki Koizumi from my Mario series, taking over the reins as the main Mario producer from Miyamoto. Originally, Koizumi had dreams of becoming a filmmaker. However, he ended up at Nintendo in 1991 since he saw that games could be a new frontier for visual storytelling. One of his first gigs at Nintendo was writing and designing the Link to the Past manual. The story of the 3 goddesses and the Hylian creation myth is his doing. The kooky characters and character arcs and this cinematic intro to Link's Awakening, also all Koizumi. He handled the bulk of the story work, fleshing out the characters as real living people, with quirks, personalities, and full arcs. For the first time, story became an important component. Kensuke Tanabe was involved in scenario design for A Link to the Past. He had an idea that was put aside in that game that would fit perfectly into this surreal, dreamlike game. A giant egg that, when cracked, would usher in the end of the world. Is Kensuke on something? Is he okay? You okay there, Tanabe? With the traditional Zelda motifs ditched, a new setting was created for the game. A strange island with strange events and fun, crazy characters. As you'd progress through the game, it'd be revealed that Link was trapped in a world that is a dream of a supernatural creature called the Windfish, which is, let me check here. A mystical flying gypsy whale. Yeah, that sounds about right. By waking this mystical flying gypsy whale, the island and all its inhabitants would disappear forever. Strap yourselves in, cause things are about to get heavy. Link's Awakening begins with Link getting shipwrecked and stranded on an island called Koholint. As Link progresses in his journey, he discovers that the island isn't real, but a world dreamt up by this magical flying gypsy whale. And by waking him, or her, the island and all its inhabitants will disappear forever. The dungeon bosses in this game are referred not as bosses, but as nightmares, and that is the perfect name for them because 1, this is a dream world, and 2, one of the dungeon boss nightmares is a freaking clown genie. The further you get into the game, the more they'll tell you about their dastardly plans. They have kept the Windfish asleep to keep the island in existence. Without the nightmares, the Windfish will wake up and the world will end. They are simultaneously terrorizing the inhabitants of the island while also keeping them alive. Meaning, to save the island, you must destroy the island. This is kind of messed up. But it all is just a dream, it's not real, none of this is happening, right? So what's it matter? Let's get existential here. Have you ever had a dream that really resonated with you? You woke up the next morning still thinking about it and maybe still experiencing the emotions the dream elicited in you while you slept? How about this? Have you ever had your brain create a love interest in your dream? I don't mean dreaming about a crush, but a completely fabricated person from the recesses of your mind. She is not real, but she still felt genuine. It's a surreal feeling to wake up still in love with a person who has never existed. The people of Koholint have lives and personalities all to their own. There are families, dog owners, artists, musicians. There's even a love interest for Link. It's a world that to Link feels real. Marin is a young girl who finds Link washed ashore on the beach, and it's obvious she falls for him. And the player kind of reciprocates it on behalf of Link. She becomes the love interest. But she's not real, because 1, she's a fictional character in a video game, and 2, she's a dream, and not even a part of Link's dream. She's a part of someone else's that Link had somehow invaded. But the reality of the person's existence or lack thereof does not diminish the genuine love which can still be truly felt. When you wake up, you're still sad that you loved and then lost a person who never existed. The love was both real and not real, which begs the question, what does it mean to love if love can be real in a fabricated reality? I want to remind you, this is a video game originally from 1993 exploring existential ideas about love and existence, all on, let's see here, the Game Boy. This is the exact kind of thing a young, pretentious, early 20-something fresh out of film school would come up with. And that fits the description of Koizumi at this time to a T. But you know what? I'm here for it. This hits on a note that I kind of resonate with. To save a life, to save your life, you have to destroy a world. Would you do it? Would you? What would you do? What would you do? The world is taken over by evil nightmare monsters, like a clown genie, but they're the ones keeping the world in existence. To save the world from their own nightmares, like a clown genie, also means erasing it from reality, a world you grow to love and adore. This can also be a metaphor for falling in love with the characters in a book or movie, or even this game itself. You're enjoying it so much you don't want it to end, but you also want to see how it ends. A catch-22. For a game from 1993, there is a surprising amount of depth. I'm like, geez, man, I just wanted to play some Game Boy. Let's get into something a little less heavy and a little more fun. A Link to the Past was a complete overhaul of the Zelda format compared to the original Zelda on the NES. Link's Awakening isn't a radical departure from what A Link to the Past established. Considering this game started as a direct port of A Link to the Past, this isn't surprising. At the same time, though, it is a vastly different design approach compared to the SNES title. Dungeon puzzles and ideas aren't vastly different, they're just more refined. It's how the items are presented that is recontextualized. They aren't just the big secret item to be found in the big chest that may or may not be prudent to complete the dungeon. Instead, each item in each dungeon becomes a key in solving the dungeon. The Rock's Feather allows Link to jump over gaps. The Power Bracelet gives Link the ability to lift pots blocking his way. Oh no, the pottery. The Pegasus Boots allow Link to do a few different things. You can now go fast, just like in A Link to the Past. And you can knock things out of trees, because that's how I get things down from high places. I just ram the wall with my head. When combined with the sword, it can break through these special crystal blocks. When combined with the Rock Feather, Link can jump across larger gaps. Recontextualizations upon recontextualizations. Tezuka is really using his item combining idea here. The key items in most dungeons are also needed to defeat the boss/nightmare, and in some pretty creative ways, like Slime Eyes. You swipe with your sword and he starts to split, and then you use the dash from the Pegasus Boots to rend him in two. Or Slimeal. What's the deal with slime here? You use the hook shot to snatch him out of his cave so you can whack him with your sword. These recontextualizations don't just stop with the dungeon design. It's applied to the overworld as well. Now the game acts like a Metroidvania 1 year before Super Metroid would really define the structure of that formula. At the very start of the game, you can only explore the village and a small part of the beach, which is a hazard if you have no sword and no shield. But talk to Terran in the house you woke up in, and you'll get your shield. Now you can push these urchins and explore a little more of the beach at Taranobo Shores to get your sword. Once you have your sword, you can explore the mysterious forest and part of Koholint Prairie to get to the mushroom and the magic powder. With the magic powder, you can turn the raccoon back to Terran, get the tail cavern key, and explore up to Gamponga Swamp if you want to. Once you get the Rock's Feather from the tail cave, you can now explore more of Koholint Prairie, Tabal Wasteland, the cemetery, and this area west of Kaponga Swamp. After getting the power bracelet from Bottle Grotto, you can lift these rocks to explore Ukuku Prairie, Canalit Castle, Tautau Heights, some of the western parts of Tautau Mountain Range, and parts of Martha's Bay. With the Pegasus boots, you can use the cave to cross the river and reach the Animal Village, Yarna Desert, and the ancient ruins. The flippers give you the ability to swim in Martha's Bay and explore the rest of the eastern Tautau Mountain Range. And finally, the hookshot opens up shortcuts across the map, unlocks the western part of Tautau Mountain Range, and access to the River Rapids ride. Not only do weapons open up more of the world, but they also create shortcuts. Before the power bracelet, you had to take this path completely around through the mysterious forest. With the power bracelet, you can lift these boulders and get there quicker. Items no longer just make you more powerful or more capable, but also aid in your traversal abilities. They aren't overhauled like they were in A Link to the Past. They're simply recontextualized, which is the basic theme of Link's Awakening's design philosophy, a phrase I've been mentioning over and over again. Tezuka called this game a Zelda parody, which is interesting because he was also the director for A Link to the Past, so he kind of made a parody of his own game. Because he viewed it as a parody, he felt more freedom to rethink what makes a Zelda game a Zelda game. He could recontextualize the Zelda tropes within themselves. So they took a lot of liberties in designing this game in both mechanics and, motif, I guess, which could have gotten them into some serious trouble. Another tangential aside, I want to take a moment to talk about brand and intellectual property rights. Characters from other Nintendo games make appearances in Link's Awakening. Mario, Luigi, a Yoshi doll, a picture of Princess Peach. They're all here. If this were to have happened today, Takahashi Tezuka admitted he would be mad, even though he himself did it 30 years ago. The reason he'd be mad, and I'm just spitballing here, is probably because he has a better understanding of brand. Let me explain brand. Brand is how a company relates to the consumer. Let's take Jif Peanut Butter. When I think of Jif, I think of peanut butter sandwiches and school lunches. I think of Mom. Jif is family and childhood. Now let's think of Mario. When you think of Mario, you're thinking of a type of game you're going to get. The tone, the motif, the mechanics. You have a preconceived idea of what to expect from a Mario game. And that tone, motif, and mechanics are very different than what you'd expect from a Zelda game. This early on in each of the franchise's histories, you may not want to be mixing the two in this fashion. It could dilute the brand and cause brand confusion! Meaning you now don't know what makes Mario Mario or what makes Zelda Zelda. But their mentality at this time was, it's for the Game Boy, who cares? As if this game was lesser than because of that. Mario isn't the only character to appear. You have Wart from Super Mario 2, Richard from a Japanese-only game, The Frog for Whom the Bell Tolls, Kirby from Kirby, and Dr. Wright from SimCity. This is where it gets interesting with intellectual property rights. Mario, Zelda, Donkey Kong are IP owned by Nintendo. They aren't likely to let Sony or Microsoft use them for a game on their platforms. Kirby is currently jointly owned by Nintendo and HAL Laboratories. HAL is not owned by Nintendo. They are their own independent studio that acts as a second-party developer making games exclusively for Nintendo. In 1993, they owned Kirby. I don't believe Nintendo shared in any of those rights at that time, because Tezuka specifically mentions he doesn't remember getting permission to put Kirby in his game for the Game Boy. He did it because, who cares, it's just a Game Boy game. That's not how IP law works. Lawyers care. But I wouldn't consider that their greatest transgression. At least Kirby was considered an original Nintendo character. Dr. Wright, on the other hand, may be a bigger deal here. Dr. Wright is a Nintendo-exclusive character from the SNES launch title SimCity. He was based off of a real person. SimCity game designer Will Wright, who would go on to make The Sims. Mr. Wright, how do you sleep at night?
On top of a pile of money with many beautiful ladies.
Dr. Wright is designed from Will Wright's likeness, except for the green hair, but everything else looks kind of spot on. And I assume they had permission in some form to use his likeness in SimCity, but I doubt there were official contracts written up for this cause it's video games in the 90s. Who cares? so by using his likeness again for a separate game on a different platform is legally dubious at best. By approaching this Zelda parody with the aloofness they did back in the early 90s, if done today, could have gotten them into some serious trouble. To once again quote Mikey Newman from FilmJoy, no one knows what they are doing. Despite the various liberties the team took with developing the game, they didn't really push the boundaries. Rather, they took the ideas from A Link to the Past and recontextualized what a Zelda game could truly be. Don't think outside the box, recontextualize the box. They didn't come up with brand new items or many new mechanics. The only original item was the Roc's Feather. On the surface, it looks and plays just like A Link to the Past, just a little weirder and kookier. They didn't think outside the box, instead they redefined what that box could be, by simultaneously remaining within the original defined parameters. There was an overworld, there were dungeons, and there were items that were all familiar to previous Zelda games. The use of the items wasn't even that radically different. They all acted similarly to A Link to the Past. They just recontextualized how they could be used. The overworld has similar variety to A Link to the Past. Forest, desert, swamp, water, temple, village. It's traversal that is recontextualized. Dungeons are similar in nature to A Link to the Past, but its locks and keys are no longer just literal locks and keys. But the items also act as a key to open obstacles that are in their own ways locks. Thank you, Mark Brown at Game Maker's Toolkit, for pointing that out. The box is the same box as before, but it's being used in a different way. With rethinking what the Zelda box could look like, they established what the Zelda box would become. Not only did this game set the standard for dungeon and item design and usage, it defined how the compass would work in future Zelda games. It established the trading sequence, finding and collecting items for upgrades, chicken flying, the song mechanic, fishing, mini-bosses. All established in this game because they recontextualized what a Zelda game is rather than trying to completely redefine it. In an interview on Iwata Asks, current Zelda producer Eiji Aonuma flat out admits that without Link's Awakening, Ocarina of Time would not have been the game that it is, which would define the look and feel for all 3D Zelda games. The fact that this game was done originally on the Game Boy is just amazing. Don't think outside the box. Recontextualize the box. No game is made in a vacuum. Ocarina of Time stands on the shoulders of giants. Oh, I swear these hot takes are gonna get me killed. Zelda 2. A game with a few die-hard fans and many detractors. Its difficulty is infamous. It's known for its harsh punishment for failure and very unforgiving enemies and bosses. It gives credence to the term Nintendo hard. Few Zelda fans count this title among their favorites. Despite its lack of appreciation, the game is monumentally important to the development of the Zelda franchise. If Link to the Past set the stage for the overall feel and motif of a Zelda game, and Link's Awakening defined the item and dungeon formula, then the adventure of Link defined Zelda's combat mechanics for the 3D realm. It had a strong emphasis on swordplay, maneuvering around the enemy's movement to hit where they weren't blocking. It was a good idea on paper, but the execution on the NES left a lot to be desired. If it weren't for Zelda 2, A Link to the Past, Link's Awakening, and, surprisingly, Super Mario 64, Zelda's first foray into the 3D space could have looked a lot different. No game is made in a vacuum. So how exactly did these past 2D games influence Ocarina of Time? To answer that, you'll have to grab your Furby and slap on your slap bracelet. Things are about to get weird between friends as we get jiggy with it. So hit me baby one more time, I am not gonna wait for my life to be over. It is 1998, the year the Earth got hit with 2 asteroid movies. As Mario 64 came to a close, development on the first 3D title for the Legend of Zelda series ramped up. It began with 2 developers at first, Toru Osawa, who would end up becoming the script director and the main director overseeing the project, and Jin Ikeda, who was working on character design. Yoshiaki Koizumi would join as a third member of the development team, becoming the director of 3D systems and character design. All said and done, the game would have a total of 5 directors. Miyamoto would act as a producer/supervisor as he was now running the entire Nintendo EAD department, Entertainment and Analysis Division, formerly Nintendo R&D 4. It was rebranded in the early 90s. Super Mario 64 would be the last game he personally directed. In this role, Miyamoto would get a reputation throughout Nintendo for upending the tea table. He would come into development, see what the team was working on, come up with an idea, tell the team to get it done, and then leave.
What?
And since game design is anything but simple, sometimes even the simplest of changes can have far-reaching consequences. Thus, upending the tea table. From his experience in Mario 64, Miyamoto was concerned about the N64's ability to render large fields and spaces that would make up Hyrule. His starting idea was to copy Mario 64, just set the game in Ganon's castle, and then that would act as a hub to go to other sections and areas. The team assured him, though, that a wide-open world was possible on the Nintendo 64 hardware. They'd be able to bring a version of the land of Hyrule as it was known in 2D to life in 3D. And this gave Miyamoto another idea. Make Zelda 64 a first-person perspective game. You'd only see Link when the player entered combat. The perspective would shift to a side view for the battle. This would do a few things. One, it would give the player an up-close and personal view of the wide-open landscapes they were designing, and it would enable more details and polygons to be rendered in the game without having to waste any of them on the player character. Polygons were a very limited resource in these early 3D gaming consoles. The team did not like that idea, Koizumi particularly. He worked so hard on designing Link, he couldn't bear to not see his hard work on screen all the time. And when they tested this idea, the first-person perspective just didn't feel right. It was promptly abandoned, though an element of it remained for aiming and looking around for clues to solve puzzles. In past games, Link was considered to be a 12-year-old boy. The Link that was designed for Ocarina of Time was an adult. A year and a half into production, with just 1 year to go till release, Miyamoto had another idea. Since you were going to see Link, he wanted to see the differences in design between adult Link and child Link. This caused a problem. All the animations for Link were motion captured and designed for adult Link. Yes, they used mocap for this back in 1998. Creating a child version of Link would mean a whole new set of animations would need to be created. Koizumi's work just doubled. Thankfully, he figured out a way to make this feasible. He took the already completed animation sets and was able to scale them down to child Link. Miyamoto liked both so much, he wanted both Links to be in the game. Thus, the time travel element was also added.
Oh my god!
A tangential aside. One of the complaints I've seen from retrospectives of this game is how it really didn't take full advantage of this time travel idea. Once you become adult Link, you really only need to go back in time a couple of times to get the Lens of Truth and to complete half of the Spirit Temple. And those events don't really change or affect the world of adult Link. They're just things done in the past. I mean, there is one thing that you gotta do in the past that you can only get in the future to then go do in the past, but it doesn't change anything in the future. Since this mechanic was introduced so late into the game, it makes sense why more wasn't done with this idea, even though it would have been great if it had. As production continued, almost the entirety of Nintendo EAD was working on the project. Eiji Aonuma had joined Nintendo just a few years earlier and had wormed his way onto the team as one of its 5 directors. By the time he had joined, most of Osawa's script was pretty well established, and the team was rapidly turning out content. Aonuma would design 6 of the dungeons, most of the enemy characters, their battle mechanics, and would work on boss battles. He also helped with drawing storyboards. While there were titles and roles, no one really remained in their lane. If there's something that needed to be done, they just go and do it. The team worked tirelessly and enthusiastically. It wasn't until the final stretch of the development cycle did everything begin to coalesce. These random things that everyone was working on finally came together in the classic we know and love today. But if it wasn't for the 4 2D Zeldas that came before it, this game I don't think would be the beloved and transformative game it is. Because no game is made in a vacuum. Development on the first 3D Zelda game actually began during the Super Nintendo days. Miyamoto was very impressed with Star Fox's Super FX chip and wanted to create a Zelda game with that tech. The idea was to develop a polygonal Zelda 2 remake for the Super Nintendo. The idea was immediately scrapped. Production resources were reallocated to create content for the upcoming Nintendo 64. When production restarted for Zelda 64, the Zelda 2 remake idea was briefly brought back to life, and then immediately scrapped again. But that core combat idea from Zelda 2 would remain a heavy influence. The team wanted to create a Chanbara sword action game, but there were a few issues. Zelda 2's combat was, I'd argue, not great. Add the third dimension, well, that's just another complication. Translating something that some would argue didn't work well in 2D into 3D was going to be a tall order. Thankfully, Koizumi had experience on Mario 64 and understood the trouble that the third dimension can bring. Trying to do something as simple as lining Mario up with a sign for him to read wasn't as straightforward as you would think. How is combat going to work if the player couldn't even easily line themselves up to read a stationary sign? This led to the idea of Z-targeting, which was revolutionary at the time. Instead of tasking the player with keeping track of an enemy, the game would do it for you. This would solve the problem of lining up against other objects in 3D space, a problem Mario 64 never solved. But they didn't really know how they would execute on this. They needed inspiration. So the team planned a field trip to Toy Kyoto Studio Park. I really hope I'm pronouncing that right. I don't think I am. Oh well. Think of an entire theme park that is pretty much the Indiana Jones stunt show at Walt Disney World, but with samurais and ninjas. The day they went was an oppressively hot day. So to escape the heat, the team ducked into a playhouse. Here, during this show, Osawa and Koizumi would each take away something different that would be indispensable to Ocarina's combat design. While watching the sword fights, Koizumi noticed that the hero would be outnumbered, but he would still win the battle. So he paid closer attention to the next battle, and noticed that the choreography had one bad guy engage the hero at a time, while the others waited their turn. Since his attention was focused on the hero and the person he was engaging, Koizumi didn't notice the others. This made the fight doable for the hero, and has also been a kung fu movie trope for decades. Z-targeting would be scripted in such a way that whichever enemy the player was targeting would be the enemy that aggroed. The other would wait his turn. Osawa noticed something completely different. During the show, one of the ninjas attacked the samurai with a kusarigama, a sickle and chain. Once again, I really hope I'm pronouncing that right, believe they. The samurai caught it with his arm and pulled the chain taut, while the ninja still held onto the handle. The ninja now circled around the samurai while always facing him, connected by the chain. This would define the movement of Z-targeting. While not targeting, Link would move freely around. When Z-targeting, an invisible chain would connect Link to the target object. Now Link would circle around the target while always facing it, and it changed how he moved and behaved. He could now jump to the side or do backflips or do a jump attack. They had a solution to make Zelda 2's swordplay idea work in 3D. With the problem of combat and interaction in 3D space solved, the team could get into the meat of the game's design. It wasn't just Link's Awakening that gave us the Zelda dungeon formula. If it wasn't for A Link to the Past, Link's Awakening would have never iterated on that design to formalize the Zelda dungeon design philosophy. But really, it's Link's Awakening that gave the Ocarina of Time development team the format to translate 2D ideas into a 3D space. Zelda dungeons had always been about finding small keys to unlock doors. and in each dungeon there is always a special item to find to aid you on your quest. A Link to the Past added a big key that would be used to unlock the chest for the dungeon's key item. Link's Awakening switched the big key to unlock the door to the boss room. The item found in the dungeon would become a kind of key as well. The item would unlock other areas of the dungeon and was necessary in defeating the dungeon boss. Link's Awakening set in stone that dungeon formula, and Ocarina of Time ran with it. All but one dungeon required the item to unlock more of the dungeon and to defeat the dungeon boss. Note, the Shadow Temple did not require the hover boots to defeat Bongo Bongo. They actually got you killed if you had them equipped. Instead, you needed the Lens of Truth, which you got from the bottom of the well, a mini dungeon you completed in order to reach the Shadow Temple. The team did have a hefty challenge, interpreting Zelda design from 2D into 3D. Keep in mind that Zelda dungeon design philosophy, as we know it, had only been used in 2 of the 4 Zelda games made thus far. Fortunately, the developers had already approached the 2D Zelda games as 3D spaces portrayed in a 2-dimensional medium. Link's Awakening did a fantastic job of that with Eagle's Tower, and the Link to the Past had elements of that in the Tower of Hera. So translating the puzzle ideas and unlocking key design idea wasn't going to be that difficult. Creating easy to navigate dungeons and puzzles in the 3D realm?
That's something else.
Dungeons, for the most part, had large, memorable central rooms that the player would continuously cross through. This would act as an anchor for navigating each level. They started off simple. The first 3 dungeons as Child Link have no small keys, so thus have no locked doors. The Deku Tree, Dodongo Cavern, and Jabu Jabu's Belly act as introductions to how Zelda dungeons will work in 3D. And the Deku Tree is the perfect tutorial dungeon. It's separated into 2 phases. Phase 1 was the trunk of the tree, a wide open room with multiple levels with rooms jetting off into dead ends, kind of like a hub with spokes sticking off it. It's a memorable space you can use to always reorient yourself. In those spoked off rooms, you solve simple puzzles to get the slingshot and compass, and then once you gain the items, you use the height of the trunk to fall through the spiderweb to reach the second phase of the dungeon. Once again, you're in a large, memorable room. But this is not a hub and spoke. There's only one accessible door. This path brings you around in a circle to a higher ledge back in the main room where you can push down the rock to create a shortcut, and then you use a Deku Stick to light the spiderweb to fall down another hole to face the boss. You're facing off against enemies and solving puzzles along the way, but most puzzles don't expand past one room. It's a lovely introductory dungeon. Easy peasy lemon squeezy. You're learning the game's design and puzzle language bit by bit. The dungeons expand from there. The Dodongo's Cavern has you crisscrossing back and forth across the main room on different levels, but is once again separated into 2 distinct sections, outside the statue mouth and inside the statue mouth. Jabu Jabu's Belly gets a bit more complicated. This dungeon requires you to have the map designed in your head so you can fall down these sinkholes to get to different platforms below to access different areas of the dungeon. They're asking you to see how one room interacts with another, and how changing something in one room can change the layout or accessibility of another. This dungeon isn't separated into 2 phases like the last 2. This one becomes more interconnected. These dungeons ask even more of you in the adult timeline. Some are more interconnected, with the maps folding in on themselves and changing their form. Like these winding corridors change the gravity of the following room in the Forest Temple. The Fire Temple has you navigating a complex labyrinth to knock a block from the top to fall to the bottom, creating a path to the boss. And then there's the Water Temple and its water level. People have thoughts on the Water Temple. I personally really like it. Having to change the water level around, constantly reconfiguring the whole temple was interesting, and I felt really accomplished when I finally untangled that knot when I was 12 years old. It's Zelda 64's menu design that slows this dungeon down to a crawl. That's the frustrating part. Not the dungeon design itself, but the archaic menu design of the 90s. What is odd is the fact that the Water Temple is the apex of complexity for puzzles. In the late game, dungeons become more linear, challenge-based gauntlets with some pretty simple puzzle designs. I'm not going to delve much further into the dungeon design because Mark Brown from Game Maker's Toolkit does a much better job discussing Zelda dungeon designs in his Boss Key series. There's no need to reinvent the wheel here. I would highly recommend watching his video. If the team constructing Ocarina of Time took great inspiration from Link's Awakening, most of that was applied to the dungeons and items. The overworld is a different beast. Link's Awakening slowly opened up the overworld, kind of like a Metroidvania map. Ocarina of Time's overworld isn't like that at all. There are a couple of areas that require an item to reach, like bombs to get to Zora's domain, or the long shot or Epona to get to the Gerudo Desert, but most of the map is blocked off by adventure game style mechanics. Link's Awakening's contributions to Ocarina of Time's overworld are the fishing pond, the trading sequence, and that guardian owl. Ocarina took more inspiration from Link to the Past, and a little from The Legend of Zelda. The overworld is filled with secret holes, kooky characters, and random fetch quests in order to progress in the game. A lot like A Link to the Past, but more obtuse in some ways. All the tropes established in the first couple games are here, and some are brought back. The Lost Woods is no longer a creepy atmosphere, but once again, a maze. Kakariko Village is your place of respite with some fun characters to meet, and Death Mountain is a treacherous climb. The difference between A Link to the Past and Ocarina of Time's overworld, though, is the layout. Link to the Past layout was a little more fluid. Ocarina of Time's map is more individualized and connected by a singular location. Let's talk about Hyrule Field. Instead of having an interlocking world, each area is a spoke off a wheel that is connected by Hyrule Field. You have Kakariko Village and the castle town to the north, you have Gerudo Desert and Lake Hylia to the west, and to the southeast you have the Kokiri Forest. There are shortcuts to quickly go from one end of the map to the other, but to get to any location, you'll be crossing through Hyrule Field a lot. A modern critique of Hyrule Field is that it is empty with very little to do. And that complaint is actually just a fact. There aren't really any cool secrets to find, no cool weapon or secret item that amazes, there isn't a secret dungeon or anything really of interest. There's a pea hat, a giant overly difficult to kill pea hat, that's something. Oh, and ghosts! Let's take a look at the real purpose of this field. It's more than just a way to connect the different parts of Hyrule together. It's supposed to invoke a feeling that the 2D games just couldn't. Zelda gave a large expansive world to explore, and A Link to the Past gave more depth and detail to flesh that out. But in Ocarina of Time, the first moment you walk into the field after leaving the forest, you get an idea of the scope and breadth of this world. It's massive. For 1998 at least. Hyrule Field, with its lack of content, still brought a lot of life. It's here in the field you can see the castle and Death Mountain in the distance, a large ranch in the center, the foothills to the mountains that lead to the desert, and the day-night cycle is introduced here. The first time you travel across the field after leaving the Kokiri Forest to get to Castle Town, you more than likely won't arrive to the gates until after dark. You have to wait for the sun to rise in order to enter. It takes you a full day. It just felt big that way. And when you enter other areas, based on the time of day, different events and different characters would be available. This area made Hyrule feel like a real large space. The point of this field is to do what Zelda had originally set out to do. Give you that wide-eyed stare as you begin your journey across the kingdom. It was to feel large and epic. This was a sprawling, living, breathing kingdom, and you are going to save it. While it may seem tiny and uninteresting today, it set the foundation for overworld design in the third dimension. Super Mario 64 required a pretty radical redefining of the Mario experience in order to be playable in the 3D space. Also, the team ran out of time during development and had to get something out in time for the Nintendo 64's launch, so that's also a factor. Zelda, on the other hand, had an easier time translating what worked in 2D into 3D. The design philosophies, boiled down to their absolute basics, work well with the new medium. In addition to that, Ocarina of Time was a triumph of design. Without it, who knows where current game design would be. It made third-person action combat intuitive in the 3D space. What GoldenEye did for FPS games on consoles, Ocarina of Time set the design standard for action-adventure and pretty much any other third-person based action game. And moreover, it's still a very playable and enjoyable game today. Not something that can be said of a lot of 3D games from this era. Oh, there are some chinks in the armor. While some would argue it's the water temple, I would say it's the overworld quest design. They're reminiscent of the obtuse fetch quest / adventure puzzle solving of 90s video games. Let's take a look at how you open Dodongo's Cavern, the game's second dungeon. You have to first go to Hyrule Castle, find a sleeping Talon, get an egg from Marin, wait a day for the egg to hatch, use the Cucco to wake Talon, move the boxes, go through a stealth section, talk to Zelda to get her letter, talk to Impa to learn Zelda's lullaby, use the letter to get to Death Mountain, play the lullaby to get to Darunia in the Goron City. But he's a mood, nothing's cheering him up. How do you cheer him up? Go back to the Kokiri Forest, follow the music through the Lost Woods, find Saria, learn her song, go back to Darunia and Death Mountain, play Saria's song, cheer him up, he gives you the Goron arm brace, now you can lift up bomb plants, and finally throw in over this specific edge to open up Dodongo's Cavern. It's a lot. It took the fetch quest that A Link to the Past used and turned it up to 11. Don't know if that's a good thing. This is part of the reason why we have Navi, which her name is just short for navigation. She would chime in, whether you wanted her to or not, to let you know, hey, maybe you should try this. I think the only Zelda companion more disliked than Navi has to be, what's her face? Fi, or is it Fi? Whatever, the sword chick in Skyward Sword. It's the only one that I can think of that people hate more than Navi. Each dungeon does have a quest to open the dungeon. A few even have mini dungeons to complete to open that main dungeon, like the Ice Cavern to get the Iron Boots to get to the Water Temple, and the Bottom of the Well to get the Lens of Truth to open the Shadow Temple. And also with the Shadow Temple, for some reason, you just have to have Din's Fire. Like, hopefully you found that if you were just exploring, and nowhere else is it needed. Despite some of these idiosyncrasies of the past, Ocarina of Time is still a very enjoyable game to play to this day. When I talked about Super Mario 64, I mentioned you had to approach that title with the attitude of, this is great for the time it was made. You have to view that game through the lens that it's one of the first, and for being one of the first, it got more right than it did wrong. Ocarina of Time, I don't think really needs that lens. It stands very well on its own 2 feet to this day, even if those 2 feet are firmly planted on the shoulders of giants. And not just the giants of previous 2D Zelda games, but also Mario 64. I mean, Koizumi came straight to Zelda after working on Mario, and he was very aware of the former shortcomings and knew what they would be able to iterate on, not just to make Zelda a good game, but how to make a good 3D game, period. Ocarina of Time is not just great for its time, it's still great today. And while it may stand on the shoulders of giants that came before it, it became a giant of its own and laid the foundation that just about any other 3D action-adventure game would be built upon. No game is made in a vacuum. Ocarina of Time was a monumental success, commercially and critically. It is the 4th best-selling Nintendo 64 game of all time, trailing GoldenEye by a slim margin. Nintendo was in an enviable position that also came with its own challenge. Create a follow-up to Ocarina of Time that expands on the ideas and expectations established while still creating new, fresh, and exciting experiences to delight and surprise players. The game that came is one born of creative spontaneity made possible by an extreme time constraint. The development team was given 1 year to make a new Zelda game. This restraint would lead to a unique time loop mechanic that would influence how players approached and played this Zelda game. It is an ever-present pressure. Because of its rushed development, the team had to rely heavily on their intuition. Taking time to second-guess themselves was a luxury they did not have. Since they were both a creative and incredibly competent team, their initial instincts were mostly spot on. There are definitely some kinks to work out, but this would lead to one of the most creative and interesting of Zelda titles in the franchise. But because of that lack of time to review and think over design decisions, it sometimes led to confusing and bewildering choices. When revisiting Majora's Mask for the 3DS remake, Aonuma admits there were a lot of things in the game that left him scratching his own head. He kept a running list of things he wanted to fix, and he called it his "what was I thinking" list. Now, there is some criticism about the changes that were made in the 3DS remake that we will talk a little bit in this video, but to be able to talk about the original and the remake in this one video, I played the 3DS version. But I don't have a way to capture 3DS game footage, so all footage will be from the YouTube channel Zor Zelda and his playthrough. Thank you, Zor Zelda, I really appreciate it.
Well, what if there is no tomorrow? There wasn't one today.
Well, that's not an overused trope for videos that talk about Majora's Mask. It was 5 years between the release of Link's Awakening and Ocarina of Time. While it's become routine to wait 5 years between games, back then, we got them a little quicker. While developing Ocarina of Time, Miyamoto claims he had walked into a bodega and the owner recognized him, and then proceeded to get very upset that he was there and not working on the expectant Zelda game for the N64. While a humorous story, it is a moment that stuck with Miyamoto. So after the success of Ocarina of Time, he was eager to get a new Zelda title out the door quickly. He wanted to remix the dungeon design and create something similar to the Legend of Zelda's second quest. This would be a master quest, if you will. He tasked Eiji Aonuma to create the remixed levels, and this expansion was planned to be released on the N64 DD, a disk drive add-on for the Nintendo 64. While Aonuma initially agreed, a couple of things had changed. First, like the Famicom disk system before it, the Nintendo 64 DD was a failure and discontinued, never reaching an international audience. Second, Aonuma got caught up in designing brand new dungeons anyway, so the point was kind of moot. He showed Miyamoto his work and asked if he could create a whole new Zelda experience instead. To his surprise, Mr. Miyamoto said, "Yeah!" To his detriment, he also told him, "You have 1 year to get it done." But to make things easier, he could reuse the Ocarina of Time engine and assets to cut down on work. Aonuma accepted the challenge and got to work. He started by first grabbing Yoshiaki Koizumi and telling him, "You work for me now."
Look at me, sure. I'm the captain now.
At the time, Koizumi was working on another game concept. It was a detective game that had a week-long time-looping mechanic to solve cases. Realizing that this game was going to go nowhere since it would be a new IP and not a legacy bestseller like Mario or Zelda, he took this idea over to the Zelda sequel. When they got started, the team realized 7 days may be a bit much for players to keep track of, so they stripped it down to 3 days. Majora's main mechanic was born. By going with this looping 3-day structure and reusing assets and designs from Ocarina, the team could create a full sequel to the Nintendo 64 hit. The impossible was becoming possible. From this arbitrary restraint, Aonuma, Koizumi, and the team they assembled were able to put together a unique gaming experience that still felt like a Zelda game. The 3-day loop would adjust how players would interact and play the game. It added a time constraint to all activities. Obviously, a full 3-day cycle took roughly an hour. After that hour, either the moon would fall to the ground and you receive a game over, or you'd play the Song of Time and restart the 3-day cycle all over again. While you'd get to keep key items like the hookshot, the bow, your jars, and masks, you'd lose all your consumables like arrows, bombs, and rupees. Plus, any progress in quests or dungeons would be completely reset. The only progress that would remain would be activated owl statues for fast travel, a shortcut to the dungeon boss if you've already defeated him once before and obtained his mask, and then a begging banker who could break the space-time continuum. If you discovered the Song of Inverted Time, you could slow down the clock to give you more time to complete your objectives. In the Nintendo 64 version, it slowed time to a third, so the cycle took 3 hours. In the 3DS version, only slowed it by half, making the cycle take 2 hours, roughly. Or you could play the Song of Double Time to quickly jump forward in the cycle if part of your quest could only be completed at a certain time on a certain day. Unlike the time travel element from Ocarina of Time, this time travel mechanic permeates everything in Majora's Mask. It's constantly there, and you're constantly aware of it. It's core to the design and really changed how you played and approached the game. The time travel mechanic isn't the only thing that changed how you played the game. There was a second system in place, the save system. In Zelda games before, you could pretty much save whenever you wanted. Majora's Mask worked differently. In the original Nintendo 64 version, there were 2 ways to save. One was to play the Song of Time to reset the clock. This also saved your game, but reset all your progress. And the other was by saving at an owl statue. But the owl statue saves were a temporary save. When you would save at an owl statue, you would then automatically quit the game. When you would resume, that save would be erased, and the last time you reset the clock would be the latest save. The remake for the 3DS changed the owl statue saves to be permanent, and then even added additional save points throughout the game world. Some critics of the remake decry this change because it changed that pressure point it put on the player. I personally like the change in the 3DS. I prefer that save system. But I completely understand, and actually even agree with the critics of the updated system. They're absolutely right. I will add though, since this remake was for a handheld system, I view this change as absolutely necessary. Because typically, play sessions on a portable game system are very different from play sessions on a home console. Keeping the old save system in place may have been too much of a deterrent for players to enjoy their time with the game, especially since it was going to be played on the go. The pressure of the clock and save systems made aimless wanderings feel almost wasteful. If you wanted to have an enjoyable time with the game, you had to start each play session with some sort of plan. What did you want to accomplish, and how were you going to accomplish it? This isn't to say aimless wandering is a complete waste. You actually need to have moments of exploring in order to better understand the clockwork nature of the game's world. You just have to tell yourself, hey, this session and cycle, it's a reconnaissance mission. Get intel. Figure out what happens when and where. Because you see, certain people did certain things at certain times and on certain days, and those activities could be disrupted and changed. You had to explore and wander and sometimes wait to see what would happen and when and where things would happen. A few examples. Wandering around Clocktown on the first night, you'll discover this skeevy character waiting in the bushes in North Clocktown. He's waiting to rob a poor old woman. You then have the opportunity to stop it. Running around the fields surrounding the town, you'll discover this bloke working on clearing the Milk Road to open up Romani Ranch. He won't be done till the 3rd day. But you can open it earlier once you get the Goron Mask and barrel bombs, which means you can access Romani Ranch earlier and help stop an alien invasion? Wandering around Termina Field in the middle of the night on the 1st or 2nd night, you'll find this lonely naked man dancing. His name is Camaro. Say hi, Camaro. And depending on which day it is, that also affects which path you take through the woods of mystery to rescue Kome. The more you know of the world, the better you can plan each 3-day session. You could work on completing side quests, complete collections and minigames to up your arsenal or collect masks. Or you could continue the main quest to get items needed to reach the next temple. This would also create shortcuts to the next temple so you could reset the clock to have the full 3 days to work your way through that dungeon. The events of Majora's Mask weren't going to be as linear as previous Zelda games. In Ocarina of Time, Link had to act in order to create change in the world, like waking Talon to access the castle gardens, and then for Talon to then return to Lon Lon Ranch so you could play his Cucco game. Is it Cucco or Cuco? Cucho? I just always feel dirty every time I try and say that word. In Majora's Mask, the world did not wait for Link's actions to move forward. The events simply changed course in reaction to Link's actions. The best example of this is the Anju and Kafei quest, the results of which can be affected by your actions both in the quest and actions you take in other quests. As you work through this quest, you play the part of messenger. When Anju receives the letter from Kafei, she will meet with you in the dead of night and ask you to mail her response. You can now stalk the mailman, find where Kafei is, and sneak into his hideout behind the curiosity shop. He will give you a pendant to give to Anju, which will ensure that she will not leave town on the last night, but will wait for Kafei. And from here, depending on what you do or what you have already done, will alter the course of events. Kafei is hiding in the shop for 2 reasons. 1, he was turned into a child by the Skull Kid and wants to hide from everybody. And 2, a thief had stolen his wedding mask, and he knows that thief comes to the shop to sell stolen goods. His plan is to follow this man to his hideout to reclaim his wedding mask. So if you did not stop the thief from stealing Granny's bomb bag on night 1, on night 2, he will arrive to sell his stolen merchandise. Kafei will follow him to his hideout on day 3, which will allow you to get the Keaton mask, a letter for Kafei's mother, and you'll be able to help Kafei retrieve his mask from the thief's hideout and reunite him with Anju, where they will give you the couple's mask. This last letter you receive from Kafei to his mother then has 2 uses. You could give it directly to his mother in the milk bar and receive a glass bottle. Or you could give it to the mailman to mail one last letter before fleeing Clocktown, giving you his postman's hat as he leaves, which you can then use to get a heart container from a mailbox. But if you did stop the robbery on night 1, the thief never shows. Kafei never leaves the back of the shop, and the quest is stopped in its tracks. Majora's Mask really fleshed out the world as a breathable, livable space thanks to this 3-day time loop. The inhabitants of Clocktown and its surrounding area have routines, and you can disrupt and change those routines. But you have to plan each 3-day session. What do you want to get done? What do you want to accomplish? Are you going to explore? Find some heart containers? Complete some mini games? Maybe discover more of the routines of Clocktown? Or are you going to continue the main quest? Get the needed items and masks, open up a path and shortcut to the next dungeon? Or are you going to complete a dungeon that you've opened? The choice is yours.
The choices are yours and yours alone.
But that 3-day timer is going to require that you have some sort of idea of what you want to do. Zelda is its dungeons. The NES game was originally just going to be dungeons. The overworld was partly an afterthought. It became the glue that would hold that game together. It was the method to move you from one dungeon to the next while also being a fun place to explore. But that core idea of Zelda was still its dungeons. The Legend of Zelda had 9 dungeons. Zelda 2 had 7. Link to the Past had a whopping 12. Link's Awakening 8, 9 if you include the egg, but I personally don't count it. And Ocarina of Time had 9, with 2 mini dungeons. Majora's Mask would have 4. Which is actually fine, especially when you consider you would only have about an hour to complete a dungeon if you hadn't discovered the inverse Song of Time to slow time down. This could actually make completing dungeons take a little longer if you kept having to reset the clock, resetting all the puzzles of the dungeon. But to make things interesting, the Quest 2 dungeons kind of had some dungeon puzzle-like elements, like Ocarina of Time did with the quest to open up the last few dungeons. Zelda games always had a quest line to open up each dungeon, but those were mostly adventure game type puzzles. Find the MacGuffin to give to the right person, like a letter or a song to play. The last 3 dungeons in Ocarina of Time gave a little bit more of a skill check with their mini dungeons. Majora's Mask would focus more on puzzle solving and some skill checks in that dungeon questline structure. Typically, these quests would give you the needed items to open up the next dungeon, like the Lens of Truth, Goron Mask, and the Goron Lullaby to open up Snowhead, the Zora Mask, Hookshot, and New Wave Bossa Nova Song to open up Great Bay Temple, or the Gibdo Mask, Mirror Shield, and the Elegy of Emptiness to reach Stone Tower Temple. there was definitely a formula for reaching these temples. Mask, item or items, song. On top of making the dungeon questline more interesting, Majora's Mask made dungeons a bit more complex than Ocarina did. Majora's dungeons were more interconnected with their puzzles. Most levels in other Zelda games had puzzles sectioned off to a room or maybe a small set of rooms. Solve that puzzle to unlock the next area of the dungeon. A few deviated from that, like in A Link to the Past and Link's Awakening had color-shifting crystals which would change which color blocks were up and which were down for the level as a whole, thus changing the layout. And then Eagle's Tower in Link's Awakening and the Water Temple in Ocarina of Time had you change the layout of the dungeon to work your way through them. Majora's dungeons acted more like those more intricate, interconnected dungeons. In Woodfall Temple, most of the water is poisoned and causes damage if you swim in it. You obviously avoid swimming as much as you can, and rely on Deku Link's water skipping ability for traversal through the poisoned water. After getting the arrows, you can shoot through a flame to light a torch on this giant wooden flower. The flower rises, changing the layout of the central room, and cleans the water in the temple. It's safe to swim, changing how you approach the rest of the temple. Snowhead Temple has a giant pillar in the center of its main room. Using Goron Link's strength, you knock sections out of the pillar to lower it to get to new areas of the temple and to eventually reach the boss room. Great Bay Temple has this turbine that spins water, and you have to open valves throughout the temple to get water flow back to the main room, to reverse the turbine and access other areas of the temple, to open more valves to access the boss room. And Stone Tower can be flipped upside down, completely changing the map and layout. Each temple has you reevaluating your approach as you progress because the layout is changing as you solve the puzzles. It is some of my favorite dungeon design in the whole series. I think Majora's Mask has my favorite dungeons. I absolutely love them. Now, because there are only 4 dungeons, the approach to items obviously changed. You still needed items like bombs, arrows, and the hook shot, but those were found in the quest to reach the dungeon. The only item/item type found in all 4 dungeons would be arrows. Woodfall would grant you the bow, Snowhead the fire arrows, Great Bay the ice arrows, and Stone Tower the light arrows. Each would be needed to finish the temple, to light torches, melt ice, freeze sections of water, and to flip the temple. But there was also another item needed to be able to access and complete each dungeon: a transforming magic mask. The main new mechanic/hook of Majora's Mask, besides the time looping mechanic, was, well, masks. They took that very small optional mask trading sequence from Ocarina of Time and expanded on that idea. A lot. There are a plethora of masks that when worn give Link a special ability. The bunny hood boosts his speed. The Mask of Truth allows him to talk to truth stones and animals. The bomb mask blows himself up.
Oh, a death watch. Cool.
Then there are the 3 main transforming masks. The Deku mask turns Link into a Deku scrub, Goron mask into a Goron, and Zora mask into a Zora. And each transformation gives him unique abilities. The Deku scrub can skip on water and launch from flower pads to fly for a bit. The Goron is strong and can roll, build up to full speed, and spikes come out, and can now be used to attack. The Zora can swim and use his fins like a boomerang, and each mask with its abilities is needed to access and complete each temple, with the Stone Tower combining them all to solve its puzzles. This meant that each temple needed the item found on the questline, the key arrow item found in the temple, and the correct mask to complete it. And each boss used the transforming mask's abilities in order to defeat him, except for Adalwa. At least in the Nintendo 64 version. Let's unpack that for a minute. Goat and Jyorg required Goron and Zora Link respectively to defeat them. With Goat, you chased him down as a rolling Goron to spike him until he fell over, and then you whacked him with your sword, or punched him. In the 3DS version, you shot this weird eye that appeared with arrows. Jyorg, you swam and grabbed these bombs for him to swallow. Twin Mold used a completely separate mask found in the dungeon to turn Link into a giant, and depending which version of Majora's Mask you played, changed how you attacked him. The Nintendo 64 version was better. Much better.
This is better! Much better!
Adalwa was the odd one out in the Nintendo 64 version. You could use pretty much whatever strategy you wanted to. There were bomb flowers in the room you could use. You could shoot him with arrows. You could whack him with your sword. Whatever you wanted to do. You could approach him how you wanted. In the 3DS version, they added Deku flowers to the boss room. They wanted you to turn into Deku Link, hop into a flower, and pop up to hit his weird eye thing that the developers added with a Deku seed from the air. This would knock him down, and then you could whack him with your sword. While some have complaints about this, I completely understand this drastic change. It brings him more in line with the traditional Zelda boss battle design, requiring that dungeon's item to defeat the boss, in this case, the Deku Mask, just like Goat and Gyorg, however you pronounce that one fish boss. Regardless of which version you prefer, the dungeons in Majora's Mask are really well made. While Aonuma and his team didn't have time to create a whole slew of new dungeons, they worked really well with the time constraint. They reoriented and rethought how items would work, and they pulled off some of the Zelda series' best dungeon design in my opinion. Majora's Mask ended up leaving an odd impression on the Zelda franchise. While it did have strong sales compared to Ocarina of Time, it did only half of its numbers. But this is still really, really good sales. The Nintendo 64 only sold 32 million units worldwide. That means almost 10% of Nintendo 64 owners had purchased Majora's Mask. That's honestly not a bad attach rate. But it is an absolutely bizarre and bonkers Zelda game. I think Jeff Gertzman's review for GameSpot back in 2000 is probably the most honest review for the game that didn't let Zelda-tinted glasses color his analysis. And it's still a pretty glowing review. Majora's Mask would have Zelda looking towards the quality of its dungeon design over the quantity of dungeons that would be included in the game, while finding other unique and interesting ways to extend the playtime without resorting to nonsense padding. Kind of failed with the Triforce quest for their next 3D title, but we'll get there when we get there. The time loop mechanic really drove how this game played, how it was designed, and how players would then approach it. It felt both like and unlike a traditional Zelda title. It heavily affected how you approach the game in each and every play session. Despite its black sheep status, Majora's Mask took what Ocarina of Time started and further developed those ideas to become part of the Zelda design blueprint. Kind of like what Link's Awakening did after Link to the Past. Link to the Past, Link's Awakening, and Ocarina of Time largely had a kind of trading sequence or MacGuffin hunt to the main questline structure. You had to find specific tools that were needed to open the dungeon, or partake in a trading sequence of some kind. All very point-and-click adventure style-esque for the most part. Ocarina of Time did introduce the mini-dungeons with the Ice Cavern, Bottom of the Well, and I guess Gerudo Hideout, but for the most part, the quests were to trade for an item, get a song, and maybe play a mini-game to get what you need to reach the next dungeon. And do a simple stealth section. Majora's Mask expands and iterates on those ideas, even the stealth section. There's a bit more challenge and skill needed to progress through those areas. The quest that leads to the dungeon is in itself kind of a mini dungeon, with puzzles to solve and obstacles to overcome. There is more here than just a simple adventure game puzzle. Not that I don't like adventure games, some of my favorite games of all time are Full Throttle, Day of the Tentacle, and Sam & Max Hit the Road. Hashtag make Sam & Max Hit the Road remake now, please? But Zelda is an action-adventure game. You are to use a combination of your wits and skill to achieve your goals. Majora's Mask did that pretty well with its main quest line design. It kind of set the standard going forward. Even if the game is sorta a mess and its remake kind of ticked off the original's more die-hard fans. Majora's Mask moves the needle just a little bit in terms of Zelda's design evolution. It established a better blueprint based on Ocarina's ideas. In addition, the clockwork nature of Clocktown and the time loop mechanic would appear to go on to influence the Hitman series and modern classics like Outer Wilds, Minute, and Deathloop. While being an outlier, Majora's Mask is still pretty influential to its own franchise, and to other developers to this day, 20-some years later.